Hi, welcome to this episode of Workspace Wellness. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Chris Wilson from Shift and Simplify, and he's going to talk to us about how we can work smarter, not harder. So, before we get into that, Chris, can you tell me a little bit about Shift and Simplify and the businesses that you work with?
Sure. First off, thank you for having me today. It's great to talk to you. And this is sort of like a passion piece for me because I think, especially nowadays, like as we're sort of like diving into this conversation of like the relevance of working smarter, not harder. Because as you know, like a majority of people now are working from home and it's something that's new to them. It's something that they've never done before. And it takes productivity to a kind of like different place that people have never really, I guess, experienced it before. So that's where our company, Shift and Simplify, Brian Humphreys and myself, has started to look at sort of new ways of how do you be productive from home? How do you be productive in your life? But for a lot of our life, we had the balance of going into an office and then having that separation of going home. So what we're trying to help people do is realize that there's a lot to go with work life integration. So being able to pull everything together, so it's not so much because like for me, for example, like I'm in my living room where I'll eat dinner in here, I'll watch Netflix, but then I'll have a conversation with you. So there's so many different things that tie back to sort of like the work you do with an environment as well. So we're helping sort of like companies sort of wrap their heads around like how do you create an environment? How do you create something where like your employees can thrive? They can flourish despite everything else that's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And my team has had the pleasure of working with both you and Brian on some of what you're speaking about in terms of finding that work-life balance and just figuring out how we really can bring our best selves to our careers and what we're doing both personally and professionally. So I really think what you're doing is fantastic. So being that this whole working smarter, not harder really is in the interest of being productive. And I think we have a similar but also very different set of challenges to deal with today in that regard. We're working from home in many cases and just working under a whole different set of circumstances. So, what are some tips that you can give and some recommendations and things we should be thinking about so that we can be more productive throughout our day, both at home and at the office?
Yeah, I think really where it starts is kind of creating like a bit of a paradigm shift between sort of the traditional time management and starting to shift to the idea of energy management. And I mean, this is a perfect example of just the fact that, like, right now, the modern world really throws everything imaginable at you with like these kind of like time consuming temptations, be it like Netflix or like something popping on your phone, all these things that can take you away from doing the work that's actually important. And what we're starting to see is that no matter who you are, you're given the same 24 hours at the strike of 12, be it you, be it me, be it Elon Musk, Bill Gates, anybody. So being able to sort of like figure out what to focus your time on is a decision of how you want to spend your energy, and really starting to recognize that energy is a currency, and that each day you start with a certain amount of energy, and what you decide to put that into as far as focus goes very much determines what kind of return you're going to get as an organization, as a business, and as an individual. So for starting our day with just sort of like those sort of like energy kind of like drains of maybe doing like email of like responding to everybody else's urgent rather than sort of like what's our most important role or what's our most important task that we need to complete in the day. And a lot of that starts to sort of like become a little bit clearer when we start to sort of, I guess, really get clarity, right? Like we've talked about it before, is like a single decision made in clarity is the equivalent of like 100 decisions made in overwhelm, because it makes it very clear about where we should put our energy into versus like just letting just the run of the mill kind of like, again, those distractions that pop up for each of us in our day sort of take us off course. And one of the things that we started to sort of like work with organizations and start to talk about is like starting to design workplaces with the end in mind. So once you're able to do that, you can reverse engineer how you're going to get there. It's in the same way of like, I never go grocery shopping without a list, because then I'm just sort of wandering around and I'm grabbing things off the shelf. And then I get home and then I look in my fridge and I go, I don't have anything to make. And it's starting to figure out what it is you want to make first. And then you can start to decide, oh, then that means I need these 5 ingredients in order to be able to do that. So that's a big part of it, is starting to look at like what it is you want to build as an organization, and especially as being able to help your employees create the kind of environment that lets them thrive, that lets them focus on not just like the work, but all areas of their life that allow them to really show up in the way that they're capable of.
That makes so much sense. And interestingly, is very much the way we approach designing a space too, right? And I think the way businesses approach any sort of goal or project or initiative that they're taking on, it's you got to sort of know where you're going in order to figure out the steps to get there. So that's really interesting. I also really thought the point about clarity is very interesting. That's something that I've talked about a lot, and I've recognized as being, I think, a big challenge for a lot of business people, or just anyone who's career focused or growth focused, is
Yeah.
figuring out how to really maintain that clarity so you can make the decisions that are moving you in the direction that you need to be going in. And I think a big hindrance to that you sort of alluded to is stress. Like, this is kind of a crazy time. There's always stresses in our lives, and I think oftentimes they get in the way of our own progress. But right now, particularly, there's so much unknown, so much uncertainty. It's even more of a challenge than usual to function without our own stress and minds kind of getting in our way. So what are some tips that you can provide our listeners to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, you made a great point too, is that especially right now, one of the biggest things is a matter of sort of adapting and trying to figure out like what is next. And that's where clarity can be a challenge, is because the future often is uncertain. We can sort of like, we can prepare, we can plan for, but we can't say with absolute certainty that things will end up being exactly how we envision them. So when it comes to being able to be adaptable and to be able to like reduce your stress levels, that means you are going to be able to be creative. And I mean, we've talked about this before. Being creative isn't necessarily grabbing a paintbrush and painting the Mona Lisa. Creative is problem solving. Creativity is the ability to start to sort of design solutions to the problem that you're helping your customers with. And it's one of those things that recognize that, like, if you're not helping, say, a customer solve a problem, then you're not really in business, because that's why customers seek us in the first place, is because they need a solution to what the problem is. So it really comes back to starting to look at the fact that, like, if our environments, whether it's like the workplaces that we have, or just even the mindset that we have, like the environment within our own sort of like where our thoughts are bouncing around, is coming back to that place of like, we're not able to be creative if we are stressed out, if we are feeling overwhelmed and overloaded and like sort of like in a fog. It's very important to start to address all those areas of our life. Like, one of the things that we went over with you is start to look at sort of like almost in the pie sense of like looking at each of your areas of life: your health, your finances, your friendships, your relationships, your career, your sense of all, like even just like your finances, when it comes to recognizing that, like, if you feel uncertain about where your next paycheck's going to come from, or worrying about what's going to happen with perhaps like the company that you work for, you're not going to be showing up in your full capacity in the job if those things are kind of out of whack. So that's where it comes back to like what we talked about in sort of like at the start, is like, it's not so much about work-life balance, it's integration of recognizing that, like, just how you and I are having this conversation right now, I can't be somewhere else. I can't balance all these things that I don't currently have the ability to control and sort of influence right now. So that's one thing that I think is really important, is being able to recognize the things that you can control, therefore like influence with your actions, the things that you can influence, like having a conversation with you and like the people that watch this, with the hopes that they start to think of things a little bit differently. and maybe see sort of like a new way of perhaps like creativity and problem solving, but then recognizing that there's things completely outside of our control and outside of our influence. And the more time and energy that we spend on those things, the more we are going to feel stressed and just feel like we have no control in our lives. And the perfect example is kind of like where we're at right now with COVID. We don't necessarily know what the future will hold, or what that means for business or our careers or just life in general. So if we focus a lot of time and energy in there, our lives are going to feel like there's not a lot that we can do about them. So it's about like Shift and Simplify wants to help people sort of like bring them back to a place that they do have control and be able to start to design a life that they don't need to escape from. It's very much kind of like reinforces the habits and just sort of the things that you do each day that really like fill you up. That like it's almost like plugging a cell phone in at the end of a night, recharging your batteries so the next day you have 100% again. Otherwise, like you're starting your days at 30% or 20%, or like you're spending it on things that like you're not getting a return on. And that's something that we need to really start to think of when it comes to like employees, is helping them sort of figure out where are the biggest investments that they can spend each day as far as like their job, but then also their lives, because that offers a huge return for a company when your employees are happy, when they're feeling fulfilled, and they have the energy that allows them to focus on the most important things for sort of like you as yourself and you as your company.
Absolutely. The potential for alignment within an organization when we start to have these conversations about sort of the importance of managing stress and our own kind of mental well-being as part of the equation
Yeah.
for working effectively is so important. I feel like you build a little bit of a toolkit along the way, right? You learn all of these things and strategies and start to develop an understanding that just helps you to kind of get through your days in a more meaningful way. So you're living a life you enjoy and aren't just kind of going through the motions. So I think that's really, really meaningful.
Yeah, we often talk about that. As you said, it's like a toolkit, right? Like it's a tool belt that you wear around, and like each of these kind of like conversations or each of these things that you learn, you start to have another tool in your tool belt that you can pull out and go, okay, this is something that I know how to deal with. I have a solution for this. But it's recognizing too that like you start from wherever you are. You're not going to have all the answers, or things aren't going to necessarily be 100% clear, but you do have to take a step forward in order to start to figure things out. And then that's where like these conversations are useful, and just the work that we do with Shift and Simplify is start to bring an awareness to companies and then individuals as well, to start to say, oh, what kind of tools do I need to put in my tool belt for the project that I need to work on that's going to allow me to be successful? Because that's a tougher kind of thing when it's not so tangible of being like, oh, I need a hammer because I have a nail.
Yeah.
And recognizing that perhaps the tools that we do have aren't going to help us in the job that we have. I'm not going to use a sledgehammer to build a birdhouse. I'm going to crush it, right? So recognizing that, oh, maybe that's not the tool I need. So maybe if I have that sort of like person that I can bounce ideas off of, they can help me figure out what tool it is or what skill development do I need to bring into my life in order to get where I want to go.
Absolutely. That's so helpful, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. And so if anyone that's listening would like to learn more about Shift and Simplify and everything that you and Brian offer, where can we find you?
Honestly, I encourage them to reach out to you. And that's something that I think like they're clearly coming through this channel because they're interested in sort of the services that you offer, and that referral from you would be great to sort of hear, just because then we know that, as you said, our company is very much about creating alignment with other companies that are interested in sort of the health and wellness of their staff, because they recognize that that very much ties in with productivity. So it'd be great to sort of like, again, I think it's one of those things that we've talked about before. If you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So we want to be able to create sort of an environment, and I just really a team of people that get us in sort of the direction we want to go.
Absolutely. We work a lot with business. We work with businesses who really care about accommodating their staff in a way that supports them. And I think for us, the physical space is, of course, the medium we're working with, but talking about health from a both physical and psychological standpoint is so important to that too. You can't really have any of those elements on their own without the others in order for it to work. So yeah, I think that's wonderful. Well, thank you again, Chris, for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
All right. Thank you.